Welcome to Leadership Matters, a podcast from the Bailey Group. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, president of and partner at the Bailey Group, where we believe better leaders create healthier workplace environments, healthier humans, and a better world. On this show, we explore real stories, practical insights, and honest conversations to help you lead yourself and others better. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Leadership Matters. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen. Today I'm joined by Marilyn Vetter, President and CEO of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, an organization deeply rooted in conservation, community, and mission-driven impact across the country. Marilyn, welcome. I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. Excited about being part of this really fabulous podcast.
Me as well. So I would love to start with, when you think about your leadership journey, what's a moment that truly shaped how you lead today, Marilyn?
I've really had some amazing leaders in my background that taught me the kind of behaviors that I should model. And I think one of the things that's really stuck with me is that the best leaders that I had always represented me when I wasn't in the room. And oftentimes it meant that they saw something in me that I had not yet seen in myself. And they encouraged me to take roles or even put my name forward in roles before I had even thought about doing that. And at the time, it felt like very selfish because that was obviously something that benefited me. But now that I stand in that role as a leader, I've learned from that. And I've learned that it's my job to represent people when they aren't in the room, to be their ally, to be their voice when they aren't there. And I think to take that a step further, it's to tell people early on in their careers what you see as their strengths. A lot of people don't know that when they're entry-level career professionals. They don't really know what is perceived as a strength by other people, and they might not even see it in themselves. It's really important to tell that to people. That has benefited me tremendously and something that I'll never forget.
That's outstanding. What are some strengths that were reflected back to you, Marilyn, early career that you didn't realize that you might have otherwise known about yourself?
Curiosity. It's funny, when I was a little kid, my mom said that I was super annoying because my favorite word was why. And, that really has served me well, is because I am inquisitive and I want to know more about process. I want to know more about people and about projects. And so that, I think, was definitely something that was important along the way. Work ethic, a North Dakota farm girl, that certainly came across pretty loud and clear. And I think the ability to communicate with others and have that ability to build relationships, and relationships built on trust and empathy, those things were certainly things that were parroted back to me in my reviews over time, but also just in conversations about promotions and what made me stand out from others.
Aside from boosting your confidence and maybe even directing some of the decisions that you made as you navigated your career, what did some of that reflecting back or highlighting you in rooms you weren't open up for you throughout your career, Marilyn?
Gosh, I think about all of those major trajectories in my career, and most of them have come because someone else saw something in me before I did. I think about when I was a brand new sales rep, and this was a very long time ago, but and a long time ago when I was a sales rep in the pharmaceutical industry, we would do mock drug fairs. And they would record those. They would videotape those. And then you would sit down with a proctor and they would debrief with you. Well, the snippet that I didn't tell you is that before I went into sales, I was a broadcaster. So I was super comfortable. I wasn't intimidated, where other people were very intimidated by being videotaped and having to watch themselves. And I got super lucky. The vice president of sales and marketing happened to be coming through and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, can I sit in on the debrief?" And I'm like, "Sure." I didn't even know who he was. His name was Joe Saratelli, and he changed my life because he saw that I had presence, that I was comfortable. And about a year later, the organization was starting what they called an account management portfolio. And he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You should consider this because it will be communicating with senior leaders in a large insurance organizations like Aetna, United Healthcare, and we need someone that's willing to have those conversations, is confident in those roles. It's just one example. Honestly, I feel like a lot of the big career movements in my life were a little bit of luck and a little bit of serendipity and a lot of support from really great leaders.
Yeah. And that hard work ethic that you
Yes.
have, a combination of all of the things. I love that, Marilyn. And it's interesting because what you're describing starts to connect to something, I know you and I have talked about before, which is you talk about this concept of as leaders rise, they carry more responsibility to be the person to reflect back the strengths they see in those around them and to carry the torch of responsibility for culture. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that and what that actually looks like in practice.
I love talking about this topic because it's very quick to be part of a team and say, it's a toxic workplace, or I'm frustrated with a team, or I got a bad boss, or, sometimes those things are true. But everybody has to own part of the culture. And if we look at an organization and say someone else is responsible, then no one is responsible. And so everybody has to have a part in that. That requires a lot of courage, and it requires really strong role modeling. Culture is owned from the top to the bottom, but the higher you are in the organization, the more of that weight falls on your shoulders because you must role model behavior because people will mimic what they see. So you must be courageous, you must be candid, because we can't ask entry-level professionals to be courageous if they don't see their supervisors to be courageous. They have to see that kind of behavior. And they have to see candid feedback, even to themselves. One of the things that I had to learn very early as a leader was that those conversations about feedback can be super hard, but you can prepare for them. And I remember just vividly this wonderful boss that I had said to me, don't ever forget that when you sugarcoat something, when you are completely honest and respectful and empathetic, but if you refrain from that, you are stymieing that person's growth and development. And that has stayed with me forever. Very selfish behavior to refrain from being candid about someone's performance. And I understand it. None of us enjoy it. But that person's career trajectory will be changed forever if you aren't candid about that. So I think those are some of the core tenets of building a really strong culture where people feel supported and they feel like it's collaborative and that it's safe.
So powerful. I know another topic that you're really passionate about, Marilyn, is mission and how foundational it is to organization success. And I'd love for you to talk about how you intentionally incorporate that in your role as CEO and president and where you see leaders get it wrong.
Mission is our North Star. It should be what makes you get up every day to serve the organization or corporation that you work for. And it is that organization's mission. So if you aren't aligned with that mission, then perhaps you're in the wrong place. Because the most important thing we can do to make an organization and corporation be successful is that we work towards that common goal. So when you lead a team, the most important thing you can do early on is, are we all synced up on mission? Is this still the mission? Sometimes over decades, those things can evolve. Thankfully, at Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, that hasn't changed. So you have to make sure that everybody's lockstep on that. From there, you can create your strategies around that. And it's been so fascinating to watch it from a corporate perspective and from a nonprofit perspective, because a lot of the same pressures come to play. In our case, our members and donors, and in a corporation, your customers come to you and want you to do different things. They want you to do more things. And that's flattering. And sometimes that's actually driven by team members. They want to do more things. They want to take on maybe a pet project. And what I've seen is that we get tied up into the emotions of the request. Some of it feels good. Some of it feels like, that's perfect. We should do it. And we just jump in the deep end of the pool right away. And what I encourage this team, and I have encouraged all my teams, is that we need to step back from that emotion. We should really think wisely about, does that align with the mission, or is it aligned with my values personally? So one of the things that we've done here because when you're in a purpose-driven, mission-driven organization, it's super tempting to follow those, rabbits down a hole. So we created a market entry criteria tool that allows us to give quantifiable numeric evaluations to whether or not that project actually aligns with mission, because the numbers don't lie. And that it doesn't mean you shouldn't include some of that personal and that very emotional part of an assessment, but it shouldn't be the primary driver because it so easily impacts mission drift. And while that might feel like it's okay, it is only okay if the mission changes, because the drift will untether you. And that might be fine while you have a very robust revenue portfolio and maybe you can afford to spend more on projects that you are not quite as sure as are aligned. But boy, when times get tough, when you faced headwinds, then you have to start making really discriminating discussions and decisions about, does this still align? And it's so much easier to have that before you've created a project that you now have to dismantle than creating a project ahead of time that all of a sudden just doesn't feel like it resonates with the mission. It's really tough to do. People want you to do more. And I think as people are caretakers for our corporations and for our organizations, and we want to do more, it's super tempting. And like I said, sometimes it is the right answer, but not always.
So powerful. And the data-driven side of me loves the matrix that you put together to just see pass, fail, are we doing this or not?
Exactly.
So Marilyn, in your own words, how would you articulate Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever's mission?
So our mission is pretty clear. And like I said, it hasn't changed. So our job is to create and restore habitat for pheasants and quail and other wildlife that live in those spaces with them. And we do that through habitat restoration, through advocacy for state and federal policies, through access so that people can access those lands as well, and through education and outreach. So those 4 pillars, habitat, access, advocacy, education, support the primary mission of the organization. And we hold that as our holy grail. As long as we remind ourselves of those pillars and that mission, and we measure our performance and our work plans and our objectives and tactics around it, then we should be lockstep.
So good. I love how you talked about how the power of an employee really aligning with the mission of the organization that they're putting time, talent, expertise behind. I'd love to hear from you. How does that mission align and resonate with you? I mean, give us a little bit of your passion behind this.
So I've come to this organization in this role as an active bird hunter and as someone so my husband raises and trains hunting dogs, German short-haired pointers. And
Wow.
I got involved with it a very long time ago. Heck, we were still dating. And because I was a farm kid, it was, when you go back into that work environment, you really don't get a lot of access to the outside world very much. And by being in this space, it gave me both feet on the ground. So I could have my career in one spot and my feet in the dirt in the other. And that was super important to me. So in my lifetime in the biopharma space, which is what I did before I came here, 30 years, I spent 30 years working and volunteering. So I volunteered in the dog space. I was a dog trialer. I judged dogs. I trained dogs. But then I also got involved in Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever as a member. And then about, I guess now 13 years ago or 12 years ago, the board came to me because I had been on the board of many, many other nonprofits and said, would you consider being on the Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever board? And I served on the board for 7.5 years before I took this role as CEO. And it's kind of funny. The previous CEO had been in this role for 26 years. He is Howard Vincent he's an icon and he's a legend, certainly in this organization. And it took a lot for me to even consider myself to be in this space. It's funny, as a woman, we oftentimes question, like, should we? And we worry. Like, you read a job description, I'm like, well, I'm probably 80% there, but I don't have 100% of it. And it took other people encouraging me, including board members and other people in my world, to say, go for it. And what have you got to lose if you don't get it? And, gosh, I am thrilled and honored and just overwhelmed with joy about taking the role. But it's been a fabulous way for me to be able to embrace my personal life in a more holistic way.
So powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't realize the background story, and it's fascinating to hear. I love how you talked about how, and I know the research is out there around women tend to not go for as high of level jobs, and the power, again, of people speaking encouragement into your own life. I'm curious if you think back to that time when you were kind of considering it, what shifted internally for you to go from skepticism and maybe some doubt to really accepting that role?
So I'm not sure if you're aware that I was a participating author in an anthology called Brave Women at Work: Lessons in Confidence. And when they asked me to be in the book, I was like, why me? Why would you ask me to do this? Because confidence for me, I was always a little skeptical if I thought I was confident or not. And it was writing that chapter
Hmm.
of what makes confidence, what builds confidence, because we aren't born with it. We might have a certain amount of chutzpah that we're built with, but I think a lot of our confidence is built over time and is built over success and with a great leadership that encourages. And so when I wrote the chapter, which it was funny, it's called Why Not Me? It was a story about a previous job opportunity. He was telling me about someone else. He was like, I'm considering so and so for a role. And, it was thinking through it with me. And the whole time I was sitting there thinking, well, why didn't he ask me? And it took me a couple of weeks to finally build up the courage to ask him, well, why can't I throw my name in the hat? And he looked at me perplexed and he was like, I didn't even think you'd want it. And by studying to prepare myself to write that chapter, I saw the data about how women want to see themselves in 100% of a job description's bullet points. They won't apply until they have at least 80% of the qualification. Well, let's be honest with ourselves. Job descriptions are written for unicorns. We aren't expecting everyone to have every single one of those attributes lockstep. We know that people are going to come, hopefully, with the majority of them, but not all of them. But we evaluate ourselves against a very high bar. And so as I was going through that process, it was one of those serendipitous moments of, well, why not you? And because of other people's encouragement, again, like I'd had in other points in my career, I finally asked myself, what's the worst that could happen? And really, what's the best that could happen? And the worst that could happen is that I wouldn't have gotten, and I would have moved on to something else. And the best thing did happen. That really was a bit of a challenge for me to get there, but I'm so glad I did it. And one of the most important things I did was part of the job interview process was a very long written inventory of how have you exhibited these particular attributes. And I was amazed at how easy it was to write it. And so it was after writing it, I thought, well, exactly, I'm ready for this. And I would encourage everyone to do that. When you look at a job description and say, these are the attributes that we want, then go back to your own experiences and say, how have I embodied those strengths and those attributes? And you'll be shocked at how ready you are.
That is such a great exercise. I know the reflection is so powerful. I love how you talked about job descriptions are often unicorn descriptions because it really is the ideal, perfect, every single box is ticked, and that's just not reality. And I love the reflective exercise of reflecting on your own journey and where have you demonstrated competence and capability in these different areas.
And I love encouraging people to do that. In fact, I had someone say to me recently, they were going to apply for a role, and he said, I just don't know if I'm the right fit. And I said, that's not your job to know. That's the hiring committee's job to know. Your job is to put yourself forward in the best way that you can, accept that you may or may not get it, and that you will learn from the process no matter what.
So
And
good.
he was like, you know what? I hadn't thought about it that way. And so he applied.
Oh, did he get the job?
To be determined.
To be determined.
We're not done yet.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, thank you for sharing that
You
story.
bet.
What surprised you the most about the role, Marilyn? I know, initially there was some skepticism. You decide you're going to go for it, and then you really build confidence in your competence to be able to do this. Stepping into the role, first 90 days, first year, what really surprised you the most?
I think how broad it is. Even though I had been on the board for 7.5 years, I think I had an idea of what the the role was. And we fool ourselves oftentimes that we think that nonprofits aren't as complex organizations as corporations are.
Hmm.
And that was by far the biggest aha moment for me, is how complicated it is and how much my corporate experience lended to the role. I would have never guessed so much of that parlayed right into this role. And so there has been some challenges, like, I'm not a CFO. I've had to really lean into that experience. And thankfully, I have an incredible CFO to help out with that. I don't have to have those strengths, but I have to have a much deeper understanding than I would have perhaps had in any other role that I had before. But I would say it was by far the complexity of the organization and its internal structure that I had underestimated.
What were the resources that helped you most overcome those obstacles?
Well, I've been a big fan my whole life of having a coach. So it's kind of like having a therapist. You don't have to have a coach all the time. But at major transitions in life, having a thought partner that you can work through things with was incredibly helpful. Especially when you're the CEO, you can't rely on everyone around you to fill those voids. They have big jobs to fill themselves. You also have to instill in them a tremendous amount of faith and trust in you that you have the ability. So sometimes you feel more comfortable maybe asking someone else what that might look like. And so having a coach at that transition point was really important for me, for especially someone that had coached people at a CEO level. That was really important. Certainly the board was incredibly helpful and helped me prepare myself. And then honestly, this team here is extraordinary. And they were all just bellied up to the bar and said, let me know how I can help. And they really, really did. And they were also very open to the idea that how things had been done in the past doesn't mean we have to do them going forward. And they let themselves be open and curious to the idea of how could we do things differently? One of the things that we did pretty quickly when I'd come in was take a really deep look at the strategic plan. And someone commented to me, well, we just finished that about 6 months ago. Is it really worth diving in? And I said, well, we hadn't involved as an organization people below the chief level in the development of the strategic plan. And I said, so what if we go through this exercise and we bring all of the directors and all of the VPs into the discussion point, and we say that there isn't a word I'd change? It wouldn't be that we wasted time. What we've done is dramatically increased buy-in. So those were just really fun examples of how the team embraced a different viewpoint. And that's hard to do when you've had the same boss for 26 years. It speaks a
Absolutely.
lot about their commitment.
Did anything else surprise you about stepping into that role, Marilyn?
One of the things I guess I didn't mention to you earlier is that I am the only female CEO of what in the industry we call the hook and bullet nonprofit organizations, which means the hunting and fishing aligned organizations. And there has been a woman previously at a different nonprofit, but I am currently the only one that is
Wow.
in charge of an organization right now. And one of the biggest reasons I hesitated about really even going for the role was how would people feel about it? And one of the most surprising things for me was how many elderly men, let's call them 80 and over, that would approach me at full banquets, at our national show, and say, thank you for doing this. It's so wonderful for my granddaughter to have something to aspire to.
Ugh.
And I was completely caught off guard. And it really told me never assume how people will respond,
Mm.
because it was so heartwarming to see how welcoming the community was.
I just got goosebumps hearing that story. I mean, genuinely, that's incredible. And I also know it probably didn't come without some adversity. So, what was that like being the only CEO in such a male dominated industry?
I suppose my lifetime has led me to this. I've had a little bit of training in this, being the only in the room. When I first started as an account manager, I remember my very first conference I went to, and there's 150 people in the room, and I was the only woman outside of the serving staff over the lunch that
Wow.
day. And so there's been moments like that over time. I'm okay with that. I have never carried that as like a source of anger. I'm proud that people are willing to make the shift, and I am happy sometimes to take some difficult conversations. I won't say that they've all been without flaw. There have been some folks that have not been as welcoming as some of those folks that we just talked about. But it's my job to approach that professionally and to prove to them that I or someone else that looks like me has the right to be in the room because we are competent. And that is the most important criteria for us to lean on. So I've felt it as a really important responsibility on my own part that I never ever get indignant about it. And that I'm like, sometimes I have to talk myself into it, like, whew, boy, I'm going to go in this room and I'm probably going to be the only woman. And I have to remember that I need to ask questions and I need to have opinions instead of shrink.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be a little scary, especially since oftentimes I'm not only the only woman, but I might be the only person in the room that hasn't sat in their job for 15 years. Well, they're experts, and I'm still learning to some degree, which actually makes sense. My favorite quote of all time is from Michelangelo, and it says, I'm still learning. And he said it at 87 years old when he was painting St. Peter's Basilica. And if he was still learning at 87, then the journey never ends.
That's incredible. You talked earlier about taking over for a 26-year veteran of the CEO role who you said was a legend in his own way. That is a really hard thing to step into. Talk about that experience a little bit, Marilyn.
One of the things that made it easier is Howard was amazing because he could have lingered. He could have kept reaching out to the team because he had such close relationships with them. And he knew the impact that he had in a conversation, in a room, in a decision. And when he retired, he really stepped back for quite some time. It was probably a good year before a lot of us had even seen him around again. So that was remarkable. And it showed his character is astounding. So that is why people were so close to him and quite honestly, why they missed him a lot. But that allowed me to step in a very different way. And I knew that I had to be confident enough to say, I'm not going to be him.
Yeah.
I need to stand in what I think is right, even though sometimes that was scary. And sometimes I didn't get it right. And that's okay. That shows trust, that shows transparency. And one of the things I think as leaders we often try to do is pretend that we have all the answers. And that's the biggest mistake we can make. So I really had to be sometimes super courageous in those meetings and be like, I don't know what you mean. What is that program? I had to ask lots of questions that I'm sure they could have rolled their eyes and like, oh God, I'm teaching my boss her job. But there were little idiosyncrasies that I would have never known if I had not been in the role. And so I had to give myself a lot of grace that I wasn't going to have all the answers. And that wasn't my job. My job is to shepherd a team that has all those answers.
So good. And you have such a learner mindset. I love that quote, by the way, from Michelangelo at 87 years old. I can just tell this growth mindset, this learner mindset. When did you first identify that in yourself, Marilyn? And or has that been hard earned along the journey?
No, I'm a very curious person. Again, that like why was always my number one question. And in fact, when I was a little kid, because I always asked why, my mother saved for 3 years to get a set of Encyclopedia Britannicas, which of course nobody has anymore. But it was to help quench that curiosity that I had, and I have always had that. And in fact, every time I've taken the Gallup Strengths Finder assessment, learner is 1 or 2 for me. So it's just deeply embedded in my core. And in fact, when my mother passed and my siblings, my mother didn't have a lot of money, but she had things, right? And as my siblings and I decided what we were going to take, that was the number one pick for me. Is I wanted those encyclopedias, even though they're from 1971.
Do you still have them?
I do, as I guard them with my life. Yes.
Yeah.
They're beautiful, leather brown, beautiful books. So if nothing else, they're a treasure to look at.
I just really admire and appreciate that perspective. And you use the word grace, which I heard all over some of your responses earlier. And I wonder, because I know you have high expectations, you set stretch goals, you motivate and inspire the team to go after big things. How do you balance that high expectations with that grace that we all need, particularly for ourselves?
I think that's actually a really important part about culture is we should inspire people to dream big, shoot for bold goals, be super clear. Thing that I love Brene Brown and almost everything she writes. But one of the things that I think has profoundly impacted me that clarity is kindness. So the more clear we are in our expectations, the more likely people are to achieve those. And the second part of that is then to debrief when we shot too high, or maybe we just something happened. But we shouldn't approach those with teaching people to feel like ashamed or embarrassed of it. We should then teach that as a learning experience. What could we have done differently? What did you learn? What would you change today if you had to start it over? What would have been a more appropriate goal? What did we do along the way that caused us to make this mistake? By teaching people that failure is part of success, then they will be more apt to be more creative because people don't take risks if they're not being creative. And stagnancy and apathy is probably the worst thing that can happen to an organization. So I want people to take chances, and they're not going to take those if they think that they're going to be in trouble every time there's a misstep, because there's going to be.
Failure is part of success. I love that.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I have a dear friend who says, experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted.
Mm,
And I
I
love
love
that.
that.
So succinctly says failure in one moment can definitely turn into a success and down the.
Absolutely. I've shared before I'm a recovering perfectionist myself, which is quite, and I'd say recovering because I haven't fully recovered yet, but the temptation is still there. But I always have to remind myself that you really can't fail unless you don't learn from it. And if
Correct.
you feel like you aren't making mistakes along the way, you probably aren't stretching yourself enough outside of your own comfort zone.
Exactly. And if you let people believe that they can take risks, that they will also ask for help along the way. The most times when most people fail, it's because they haven't asked for help, or they haven't been very like, something's not feeling right. We need to readdress this. And we don't reset, or we don't say, oh, like, how can we intercede and how can we stop the train on the tracks? And most people are too worried they're going to get in trouble that they really let failure happen. So we should learn from those mistakes, change how we go forward, and then stop along the way to make sure that we're on track. And I completely agree. As they say, failure is only if you keep repeating it.
And ask for help. That's such a powerful anecdote. We know how important those early wins are in any new role, and especially as the CEO, there are so many eyes on you. Could you share one of the priorities that you quickly came to stepping into that role?
So I came in 23. So it was post COVID, but not very far post COVID. So you think about particularly a membership type organization, a lot of organizations, no, we did not. We did not suffer a tremendous amount of membership fall off during that time, but it had declined a bit. And our counterparts in the industry were seeing more of like a flattening of that line. And one of the things that we decided was membership certainly buoys the revenue line, but really it is you're creating that power of voice. So if you're going to have advocacy as one of your priorities, you need to have more and more people that are part of that army of voice. So we did a lot of really amazing things, both from just how we secured members, how we retained members, but how we inspired members to be involved. And I'm thrilled that in the last little over 3 years, we've added, about 32,000 members at a time. So we went from about 131,000 to 165,000 members. And
Wow.
we set some really hefty goals. They were very big stretch goals for us. And to say that we surpassed them was thrilling, including, our habitat acres, that the team blew them out of the water every year. And that's not me doing that, is just the team pulling together to do it. And it's really fun to watch a whole team experience a win together. It really is. We say, everyone's responsible for securing members. Everyone's responsible in some way, shape, or form of being a fundraiser of sorts. If nothing else, it's to inspire people. It's everybody's responsibility to inspire others in conservation. And when everybody does own some of those pillars, then they feel really good about the wins, even if it's not their department.
Wow, powerful. You talked earlier about how nonprofits, sometimes it can be easy to assume that they're less complex than the world of corporate America. What are some other, educate those of us who maybe haven't spent as much time in nonprofits around what are some of the similarities and what are some of the differences that you see, Marilyn?
I think one of the differences is, so when you're in a corporation, and even when I was in every corporation that I was in, you do have to be aligned to the values of the organization, and you have to be aligned with the leadership there. You have to be aligned with the role that you're doing. There's no two ifs, ands, or buts about that. But when you leave that work at the end of the day, you know that you're investing in the organization and you're really investing in your career. And I think it's a little different approach when people come to nonprofits. They come to it more for the mission, more for their personal passion than they do for their own career. And there's two heads to that coin. One is that they sometimes do too much and can really burn themselves out because it's constant. I mean, like, it's the end of the day, you should probably go home now. It's trying to get people to know that the work will still be here tomorrow, and there is a tremendous sense of urgency, and that's wonderful, but we all only have so much bandwidth, and we want you here for the long term, and we don't want people to burn out. I think the other thing is that sometimes we have to remind ourselves as leaders to not take advantage of that, and to remind people that this is your career, that you do need to invest in yourself. You need to invest in your own development. And that was one of the things that we did for the last 3 years. We've really shifted how we invest in our leaders in the organization, which had not really necessarily been a priority in the past. So we've taken, I think, 60 or 65 people through Leadership Circle Profile. And that was a huge aha moment for most of them. Almost none of them had gone through a 360 assessment. And LCP happens to be one of my favorites only because it's you evaluate, your boss evaluates, your peers evaluate, your team evaluates you, and others. And they get to give you written feedback. So you now get context around that data. And then we married that with coaching. We didn't say, here's your data, go have fun with it, because it can be really hard to take in sometimes. And we married everybody, got 2 to 3 coaching sessions along with that assessment of, all right, what might this mean? What are the follow-up questions you might ask of your supervisor, your peers? And then how can you create a development plan around it to maximize your strengths and also maybe buoy up some of those opportunities for growth? So one of the things that I see very differently in corporate America is that there's just a tremendous contribution to people's career maturation and skill development. And they take part of that bottom line and invest it in leadership development and skill training. And nonprofits haven't historically done that. And it should be as much of a priority here as it is anywhere else. We might have to do it a little more slowly, a fewer people at a time, just because of revenues. But if we don't do that, then how are we building the future and building a bench of people that can lead it? And transitioning that internally really has made a difference in how leaders see themselves here long term.
Wow, that's fascinating. Can you talk a little bit more about how that has helped people? What I heard in that is stronger retention and stronger engagement levels, Marilyn.
Definitely stronger retention and engagement. And in fact, one of the proof sources in that is employee engagement surveys. We talked about this a little bit the other day. Employee engagement surveys can feel a little bit fuzzy sometimes, like, are they really worth it? And I'm really proud to say that we get between 85 and 90% of our entire team participating in our employee engagement survey. That's
Incredible.
that shows a lot of things. It shows trust. It shows their ability to feel like they have a voice. We always remind people that everyone has a voice, not everyone has a decision. That's an important determining factor. But the reason that we've seen increasing levels of participation is because we didn't just take the survey and say, here's the results, and then walk away from it. Just like a strategic plan, you have to do it for a reason. So you don't create a strategic plan and stick it in a drawer. You don't do a survey and not do anything with it. So we acted upon it. We'd heard very quickly that there isn't enough personal opportunity for me to grow here. I don't know what my career ladder looks like. I don't even know what I should aspire to. And I don't know what skills I need to have so I can aspire to that. Mm-hmm. So we've taken some very intentional actions in the HR team of creating career ladders. What are the skills from this rung to that rung so that people know what that is? We've then incorporated these 360s with anyone that's really a manager and above for them to understand how they are being perceived by others, which is incredibly important. Sometimes it's vastly different than how we perceive ourselves. Or what I find most remarkable is that when peer groups see you very differently than your direct reports. So having all of those things tied together has helped people feel more prepared for the next rung and more excited about it, instead of saying, if I'm going to grow, I need to jump ship. Now they say, I can grow here and I know where and how to get there.
And I've got an organization investing in that growth in me.
Yes. Definitely. They know that that's a sacrifice of the organization to, coaches are not inexpensive, but they are always a wise investment because they too see things in you that you might not see in yourselves. But more importantly, they help guide you and nudge you along.
I really commend you for the investments that you make and just this focus on continuing to reflect back what you see in others. I talk all the time, I know you and I talked about this, that I'm a better wife, I'm a better mom, I'm a better neighbor, I'm a better friend because of all the growth that I've been privy to, because I have an organization that sees me and believes in me and supports me and has really invested both financially but also time-wise. I mean, we use 360s in our work and see the motivation that comes from people hearing what others think of them. Often, a lot of times the strengths are not necessarily something that they've explicitly heard articulated to them before.
100%. I'll never forget. It was actually one of my supervisors had gone through a 360, and I had taken my team through it, and I encouraged him to go through it, and he got some really tough feedback. I mean, really tough feedback. And so he got a coach and really tried to help him understand how he was showing up to others, because that's the missing link. You can look in the mirror all day long and think, that's how I show up. And all of a sudden, people are parroting back to you something very different. And about 6 months later, his wife came up to me and said, man, it changed who he is as a dad. Yeah. So the powerful link is so much deeper than we know as leaders. The impact that you have on people, it can really, if you do it well, it can last a lifetime.
So good.
And it should. It should.
Absolutely. Marilyn, that's such a powerful place to end. This has been both a thoughtful and really meaningful conversation. And I just thank you for your leadership that you bring and for sharing your perspective so openly with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And thanks to our listeners. Join us next week on another episode of Leadership Matters. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Leadership Matters. If today's episode resonated with you, would you do me a favor and share it with someone you care about? To learn more about the work the Bailey Group is doing in the world, check us out at thebaileygroup.com or follow us over on LinkedIn. We love sharing useful articles, helpful resources, and valuable tools to help you expand your leadership capacity. Like and subscribe, and join us next time for more honest conversations.